I am an educator, and I believe in the power of connections. Every day, I help students connect prior knowledge with new ideas and concepts. But of course, the most powerful connection is the human connection. So let's connect. Can you think of a time when you felt like you did not belong? You may have felt alone, unwanted, neglected, or even excluded. If your answer is yes, you have felt like that before, and especially if this unwanted situation happened at school, then I have heard many stories, far too many stories like this. You see, over the past decade, as a tutor, a teacher, a consultant, and a researcher, I have met hundreds of students who felt like they did not belong at school. I've listened to their stories, and they've shaped my actions as an inclusive educator. Some of these students have spent hours in the timeout corner of the classroom. Others have never had a report card they felt proud to show their family. Many of them have never felt successful or even just good enough at school. Like a fish out of water, they struggled to breathe in the classroom. But how can this be, I often wonder? We all have the ability to learn. School should be a place for everyone. Now, back to my opening question. If you couldn't immediately bring to mind one of these times when you felt excluded, chances are you and I have a lot in common. You see, to be quite honest, I've never had to fight for my place in school. I've always just fit in. Those pieces have been easy for me to connect, people, ideas. So then, why should we even be concerned with creating inclusive environments? We already thrive in exclusive ones. Well, surprise, surprise, I wrote this talk for us, the leaders, the overachievers, the straight-A students, those who have it easy. Having seldom, if ever, experienced these situations of exclusion, we are sometimes blind to them. And, the lucky ones that we are, we bear the responsibility of creating these more inclusive environments. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to share with you my very personal connection to inclusion, why I am an inclusive educator today. I learned the importance of inclusiveness at a very young age, growing up alongside a sibling with a special need. I witnessed firsthand my parents' struggle to make room for my sister Margaret at home, at school, and in our community. From the first few months of her life, Mom and Dad knew that Maggie was different. She cried nonstop, and she developed strange habits. For instance, when she first learned to walk, instead of walking towards family members' open arms, she would pace back and forth across the living room. And instead of smiling at our faces and making eye contact, she would pick up family portraits and zoom in and zoom out, making those precious human connections with images of us rather than ourselves. Margaret Ann also couldn't bear the sound of loud noises. She couldn't stand to hear the vacuum cleaner or other children cry. And that was very difficult because there were 5 children in the family, so at any given time, there was always someone crying. Now, over the years, my parents had to go to countless appointments with specialists and doctor's visits to try and pinpoint the problem. Finally, around the age of 3, the verdict hit. Margaret had autism. My mother later confided in me that many people recommended that Margaret be sent away to an institution to save our family and my parents' marriage. But fortunately, my mom and dad believed in inclusion. So they summoned up their courage, rolled up their sleeves, and they pushed to make room for Margaret at home, at school, and in our community. My mother pushed for her to have place in our neighborhood school. In fact, Margaret was the first child with autism integrated in that school and even in the whole school district. My mother also pushed for her to have access to services essential for her growth and learning and that of others, such as a full-time educational assistant present in the classroom. As for my dad, well, he became a volunteer at a local community organization for families of children with special needs. And he also became Margaret's chauffeur. When she was upset, he'd be seen driving her around town. I also remember a psychologist visiting our family very frequently. When my sister had one of her daily tantrums, windows were broken, chairs were overturned, dishes flew off the table, to say the least. So, as you can now tell from my story of growing up with a sister with special needs, families of children with special needs often live in very stressful home environments. They really do need our support. Now back to the story of Margaret at school. Although she was included in a regular school, from junior kindergarten until grade 10, she was unable to learn many of the subjects that are normally taught at school. First of all, because she has autism coupled with an intellectual disability, and also because there was a lack of trained educators available at the time. In fact, she only ever learned one letter of the alphabet, the letter E. But over the years, as you can see in this photograph of Margaret and my mother, she has learned to smile, and she has also learned to make those precious human connections with family, with home, and with school. And despite her lack of literacy and communication skills, Margaret has taught many important lessons to everyone around her. I realize now, more than 30 years later, that my sister Margaret has been one of the most influential people in my life. She has shaped my values as an inclusive educator and as a person, and I honestly believe that I'm a better human being and teacher because of her. I'd like to share with you now, in closing, two of the most important lessons I learned from Margaret. The first one is empathy. E is for empathy. I'm calling on you to adopt another person's perspective, to consider it for a moment. You see, let's think. There are more than 7 billion iterations of humanity on this planet. Surely everyone could benefit from a little insight into someone else's experience. And trust me, as the child growing up in a family, watching my parents struggle with special needs, I have developed great empathy for any parent of a struggling student and for any student themselves. Lesson 2, education is for everyone. I'm strongly urging you to adopt the belief that education is for everyone. And beyond believing, I'm calling you to action today. We need to work together to write a new story of education where everyone is included. My sister Margaret and the millions of students with exceptionalities deserve a place where they can feel that sense of belonging and make those precious human connections. Quality education is a United Nations Sustainable Development Goal. As every learner benefits from education, it should be available to all. And you know what? I'm not alone in the universe in thinking this. You may have heard of the late renowned physicist, Professor Stephen Hawking. He's pictured here in a zero-gravity environment, temporarily unlocking himself from the wheelchair in which he spent most of his life. Professor Hawking was a vocal proponent for the rights of disabled persons. He has stated that we have a moral duty to invest the knowledge and expertise necessary in order to unlock the vast potential of persons with disabilities. Unfortunately, a recent report by the World Health Organization has indicated that students with disabilities are still routinely denied access to that very same quality of education. And among the barriers identified for inclusion, we can find labeling, bullying, and negative attitudes towards inclusion. So it seems to me that we all have a role to play in creating a more inclusive world, as most of these barriers exist in our minds alone. And to the opponents of inclusion, who often worry about the adverse effects it may have on students like myself, I'm going to ask you to think for a moment about the possible positive effects on the social and emotional learning of all students. UNESCO states that inclusion is desirable for equality and human rights, and that it has important benefits on an educational, social, and economical standpoint. So in closing, I will leave you with the words of Federico Mayer, former Director General of UNESCO. Federico has said, "In our world constituted of differences of all kinds, it is not the disabled, but all of us that need special education in order to become genuinely a society for all." Thank you.